brutal snowstorm swallowed the mountain and buried the road in white silence. Inside that storm, Elias Mercer and Ranger struggled forward, exhausted, freezing, and close to collapse. Moments later, Elias and Ranger lay unconscious by the roadside, half lost beneath the snow. Then an old widow named Martha Bell found them and dragged both of them to safety. Inside Martha's small cabin, Martha Bell gave fire, food, and shelter to the starving man and the loyal dog. By morning, Elias and Ranger were taken back to the military. But Elias Mercer never forgot the woman who saved both lives. If this story moves you, tell us where you're watching from. Share your thoughts, and please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. 12 years before Elias Mercer ever thought of retirement, before his hands began to ache in cold weather, and before Ranger's muzzle turned silver, there was a mountain that tried to erase them both. It happened in the northern range, where the pine trees stood packed shoulder to shoulder, and the roads were narrow enough to make a man feel unwelcome. Elias was serving with a Navy SEAL support unit assigned to recover a military communication device that had gone down during a training operation in rough terrain. It was not the kind of mission that made headlines: no enemy fire, no dramatic landing, no flags snapping in slow motion, just snow, rock, bad weather, and a piece of equipment the wrong people could not be allowed to find. That was how most dangerous things began, Elias had learned. Not with thunder, with routine. He was 56 now in the present. But back then, he was still in his 40s. Hard, built, and quiet. The kind of man who gave orders softly because he expected them to be followed. His face had already been shaped by service. Square jaw, deep lines beside the mouth, gray-blue eyes that looked as if they had spent years studying the distance. He wore a faded green military cold weather jacket over his gear. The fabric stiff with frost, the shoulders rubbed pale from packs and years of use. Beside him moved Ranger, a yellow and black German shepherd in his working years, broad-chested and steady, with a dark saddle across his back and brown eyes that missed very little. Ranger was not the loud kind of dog. He did not waste energy barking at shadows. He watched, he measured. He waited for the one sound or scent that mattered. The storm was supposed to hold off until evening. That was what the forecast said. Forecasts, Elias had often thought, were written by people sitting indoors. By mid-afternoon, the first wind came through the trees with a low warning moan. Snow began as dust, harmless enough to brush from a sleeve. Then the whole mountain seemed to lift itself into the air. White swallowed the trail. The pine trunks turned to ghosts. The voices in Elias's headset broke apart into static. "Say again," Elias said, pressing 2 fingers to the radio at his shoulder. Only wind answered. Ranger stopped ahead of him, ears sharp, nose lifted. The dog's body had gone still in that way. Elias trusted more than any instrument. "What is it?" Elias asked. Ranger looked back once, then angled downslope. 1 minute it pulsed from the ridge, the next from somewhere below. The storm twisted everything. Sound, direction, time. Elias checked his GPS. The screen flickered, found itself, then lost itself again. "Beautiful," he muttered. $1,000,000 gear, afraid of snow." Ranger glanced back as if unimpressed by the joke. "I know," Elias said. "You'd have made a better purchase." They pushed on because stopping in that weather was not safety. Stopping was surrender wearing a white coat. The slope dropped faster than Elias expected. Beneath the snow, a skin of ice had formed over loose shale. His boot slipped. He caught a branch with one hand, but the branch snapped with a dry crack. For a second he was weightless, the sky and earth exchanging places. Then his shoulder struck rock. Pain flashed white behind his eyes. He slid hard down a shallow cut in the mountain, smashing through brush and snow crust, until his body hit the lip of a narrow ravine. His gloved fingers clawed at frozen roots. Below him, the ravine fell only 15 or 20 feet. But in that cold, with one bad landing, 15 feet could become a grave. Ranger. The dog came down after him without hesitation. Ranger's paws tore through the snow as he braced himself above Elias and caught the strap of Elias's pack in his teeth. The German shepherd pulled, muscles bunching under his coat, growling through the effort. Elias tried to help with one arm, but his shoulder refused him. The pain was hot, almost insulting in such cold. "Easy," Elias rasped. "Easy, boy." Pulled again, something gave. Elias rolled away from the edge and onto his side, breath punching out of him. For a moment, the two of them lay there in the snow, man and dog both breathing hard. Then Elias saw the blood. It darkened the fur along Ranger's rear leg, just above the hock. Not much at first, but enough. Ranger had cut himself on the rock or a hidden piece of ice. The dog stood anyway, trying to put weight on it, trying to pretend nothing had happened. Elias laughed once, low and humorless. "Don't start that tough guy act with me," he said. "That's my job." He wrapped the wound as best he could with a strip torn from an inner layer. His fingers were already clumsy. The wind kept pushing snow into his collar, down his neck, into the small spaces where cold liked to become personal. They had to move. The main team was somewhere uphill, but uphill had disappeared. Radio contact was gone. The sky had lowered until it felt like the mountain was pressing its palm over them. Elias chose the direction that seemed most likely to meet a service road marked on his map. If they reached a road, even a small one, someone might find them. If they stayed in the trees, they would become one more white shape among thousands. Ranger limped beside him. That was when fear began to speak. Elias had known fear before. He did not romanticize it. Fear was not cowardice. It was information arriving with teeth. But this fear was different. It was not the fear of bullets or explosions, or men trying to kill him. It was older. The body realizing the world did not care how trained you were. His shoulder throbbed. His left leg dragged more with every step. The cold moved inward past skin, past muscle, into thought. He began losing pieces of time. One moment he was following Ranger's dark shape. The next he was on one knee with no memory of falling. Ranger came back and pressed his head beneath Elias's hand. "I know," Elias whispered. "I'm up." He stood. He fell again 10 minutes later. The road, when they found it, was not really a road. It was a narrow cut along the mountainside, used by locals for wood hauling and by no one sensible during a storm. Snow had softened its edges until it looked like a pale scar. Elias made it 3 more yards. Then his body refused the chain of command. He sank beside the road with his back against a half-buried stone. Ranger circled once, limping badly now, and lay against Elias's chest. The dog was shivering. Elias tried to push him away, to make him save his own heat, but Ranger pressed closer. "Stubborn animal," Elias murmured. Ranger's amber eyes stayed open. Snow gathered on the dog's ears, on Elias's lashes, on the faded green of his jacket. His radio gave one thin crackle, then died. Elias thought of his team. He thought of the device they had come to recover. He thought, strangely, of coffee. Bad Navy coffee in a dented metal cup. Men complained about bad coffee only because they expected to live long enough to drink better coffee later. His hand found Ranger's neck. "Stay," Elias said, though he did not know if he meant stay alive or stay with me. Somewhere beyond the wind came a sound that did not belong to the storm. A scrape wood against packed snow, then a woman's voice, old but sharp enough to cut through weather. "Oh Lord," she said, "you're still breathing." Elias tried to open his eyes. He saw a blurred figure in a gray wool coat, bent against the wind, pulling a small wooden sled loaded with split logs. The woman was short and thin. Her silver, white hair tucked beneath a knitted cap. Her face lined by age and weather rather than softness. She looked at Elias, then at Ranger, then at the sky, as if the mountain had personally offended her. "Well," she said, "this is inconvenient." Elias might have laughed if he had any strength left. The woman was Martha Bell, though Elias would not properly know her name until later. She was 76 then, a widow who lived alone in a cabin tucked below the tree line. She had come out to bring in the last of her firewood before the storm sealed the path. She had expected a hard evening, perhaps a lonely one. She had not expected a wounded soldier and a bleeding dog at the edge of her road. She knelt beside Ranger first. That was the first thing Elias remembered clearly. Not her face, not her words, but the fact that she checked the dog before she checked the man with military gear. Ranger growled faintly, more duty than threat. "Hush," Martha told him. "If you bite me, I'll still help you, but I'll complain the whole time." Ranger stopped growling. Martha looked at Elias. "Can you hear me?" He managed the smallest nod. "Good. Then you can feel embarrassed later. Right now you're getting on this sled." He tried to tell her he was too heavy. It came out as air. She emptied the sled of firewood piece by piece, muttering about foolish men, foolish weather, and foolish mountains that did not know when to let people pass. Then she used a rope, leverage, and the stubbornness of a woman who had buried a husband and still gotten up the next morning to feed the stove. It took a long time to move him. Ranger, limping, followed close. Once, when Martha stopped to breathe, the dog looked at her with those amber eyes full of pain and suspicion. "Don't stare at me like that. Good dog," she said, panting. "I'm old, not dead." The cabin was small, with a roof that sagged at one corner, and windows filmed white around the edges. Inside, it smelled of wood smoke, old wool, dried apples, and the kind of loneliness that kept everything tidy, because no one else was there to make a mess. Martha got Elias near the stove. She cut away the frozen parts of his outer layer with sewing scissors, scolding him whenever he drifted too far into unconsciousness. "Stay awake if you can," she said. "If you cannot, at least have the manners to keep breathing." She spoke that way not because she was careless, but because fear had to be given a chore. Some people prayed loudly. Martha made jokes sharp enough to hold panic back. She cleaned Ranger's wound next. The dog trembled but did not snap. Martha tore a strip from a faded wool scarf and wrapped his leg with careful hands. The scarf was green once, maybe blue. But time had softened it to no color in particular. "There," she whispered. "You'll limp, but you'll live. That is more than many can say." When Elias woke again, night had fully taken the mountain. The cabin walls shuddered. Snow hissed against the windows. The fire gave off a thin orange light, fighting bravely and not always winning. Elias lay under a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. His shoulders screamed when he tried to move. Across the room, Ranger slept near the stove. One bandaged leg stretched out, ears twitching in dreams. Martha stood at the small table with a loaf of bread, no bigger than both her hands. She cut it into 3 pieces, one for Elias, one smaller piece for Ranger, softened in broth. One very small piece for herself. Elias watched her do it. There are moments when a man understands kindness not as a beautiful idea, but as a cost. Martha Bell was hungry too. He could see it in the way her hands lingered over the bread. She was cold too. He could see it in the way she kept her shawl wrapped tight even beside the stove. She had not saved them because she had plenty. She had saved them because she had decided that having little was not an excuse to become small. "Eat," she said, bringing him a bowl of thin soup. "I can't take your food," Elias managed. "You already took my evening," she said. "Might as well take the soup." He looked at her then. Really looked. Martha's face was narrow and lined. Her pale blue-gray eyes, clear, despite her age. Her hands were rough. The fingers bent slightly from years of work. She did not move like someone helpless. She moved like someone tired who had never been given permission to stop. On the mantel stood a photograph of a man in an old winter military jacket. He had a lean face, serious eyes, and one hand resting on the shoulder of another soldier. Elias noticed the way Martha glanced at the picture when the wind hit the cabin hardest. "Your husband?" he asked. Martha followed his eyes. Samuel, she said. She did not say, "Was my husband." Just Samuel, as if death had changed his address, but not his place in the room. He served. Yes. Martha sat near the window, the bowl untouched in her lap. He pulled men out of a winter storm once, came home with a cough he never got rid of. People called him brave. Brave is what folks call a thing after it is too late to stop it. Elias did not know what to say. Martha looked toward Ranger. He would have liked that dog. Ranger opened one eye as if accepting the compliment for the first time that night. Elias smiled. It hurt. Martha saw it and shook her head. Don't overdo it. You military men smile like it's part of a weapons test. The laugh that escaped Elias was small, broken, but real. It surprised him. It seemed to surprise Ranger too. Later, when Elias drifted in and out of sleep, he heard Martha moving around the cabin, feeding the stove, checking the window latch, whispering to Ranger. Once he opened his eyes and saw her standing with one hand on Samuel's photograph. She did not know the man on her floor. She did not know what missions had shaped him, what things he had done, what things he had failed to prevent. She had no reason to trust him except that he was alive and in need. That was enough. Near dawn, a weak signal broke through Elias's radio. Static first, then a voice. Far away. Urgent. Mercer, do you copy? Elias tried to answer, but his hand shook too badly. And if you boys want him back, bring a stretcher, a medic, and something better than pride. There was a pause on the other end. Then Elias heard one of his teammates say, "Who the hell is this?" Martha looked at Elias for the first time. He saw amusement warm her tired face. "Samonin with a stove," she said. The rescue team arrived after sunrise, shapes emerging from the white with emergency packs and bright jackets. They treated Elias's shoulder, checked Ranger's leg, asked questions Martha answered only when necessary. She did not act impressed by uniforms. She seemed more concerned that someone had tracked snow across her clean floor. When they lifted Elias onto the stretcher, he fought to stay conscious. "Ma'am," he said, voice rough. Martha came close. "What's your name?" She tucked the quilt tighter around him, as if he were a boy too stubborn to admit he was freezing. "Thank me by living," she said, "and feed that dog properly. He has judgment in his eyes." Ranger, carried carefully by one of the medics, turned his head toward her. The dog gave a low sound, not quite a whine, not quite a farewell. Martha touched 2 fingers to his forehead. Then they took Elias out into the white morning. As the team moved him away from the cabin, Elias turned his head as much as he could. Through the blur of pain and snow glare, he saw Martha standing on the porch. Her hands were red from cold. Her gray cardigan moved in the wind. Behind her, the cabin smoked weakly from its chimney, small and stubborn against the mountain. Elias thought he would come back soon. He thought gratitude was a simple thing, a debt a man could pay once the mission was done, and the world allowed him a spare afternoon. But the world is rarely generous with spare afternoons. The mountain disappeared behind falling snow, and Martha Bell became a name folded into the pocket of a life that would keep moving. Elias did not know then that 12 winters would pass before he saw that cabin again. He did not know that Ranger's muzzle would be silver by then, or that the old dog would recognize the smell of Martha's wool before Elias found the words to explain why they had come back. And he did not know that when he finally returned to thank the woman who had opened her door in the storm, he would find her standing outside that same door, with her belongings scattered across the snow. 12 years passed the way hard years often pass for men like Elias Mercer. Not in one clean line, but in fragments. A desert sunrise seen through scratched ballistic glass. A hospital hallway smelling of antiseptic and burnt coffee. A teammate's empty chair at a briefing table. Ranger asleep beneath a cot, one ear still lifted for danger. The mountain did not vanish from Elias's life after the rescue. It only learned to hide. He returned to duty within months, because men in uniform were often praised for moving on before they had finished understanding what had happened to them. His shoulder healed enough to carry weight again. Ranger's leg closed over with a clean scar just above the rear hock. The doctors said the dog was lucky. Elias knew luck was too small a word for what had happened inside that cabin. He tried, in the beginning, to do the right thing. A few months after the storm, while stationed between assignments, Elias wrote a letter to Martha Bell. He wrote it twice because the first version sounded too formal, as if gratitude could be inspected by a commanding officer. The second one was shorter. He told her Ranger had survived. He told her the dog still limped in cold weather, but refused to admit it. He told her he had not forgotten the soup, the fire, or the bread she had cut into 3 pieces when she barely had enough for herself. He asked a veteran outreach office to help locate support for her cabin, too. He remembered the sagging roof, the cold breath coming through the window frames, the way the stove had fought the night like a tired animal. There was a small repair fund for elderly rural homeowners connected to a nonprofit that sometimes helped families of veterans. Elias filled out what he could, sent what names he had, and believed, with the careless hope of a man being called back into motion, that help would find her. No answer came. After that, life resumed its old habit of demanding everything at once. Missions came. Men left, and did not return the same. Some Ranger stayed with him through much of it. A working dog with a black saddle across his yellow coat, and eyes that knew the difference between silence and danger. To the younger handlers, Ranger became a kind of legend, not because he was flashy, but because he did not waste movement. He watched doors the way old priests watched candles, patiently, with purpose. The letter to Martha became one of those things Elias meant to follow up on after the next assignment, after the next transfer, after the next injury, after the next funeral. A man could lose a whole decade that way, placing his heart in a drawer and promising to open it when the world became less urgent. The world never did. By the time Elias retired, Ranger was no longer the dog who had pulled him from the ravine. The German shepherd's muzzle had gone silver, as if snow had stayed there and never melted. The black along his back had dulled. The gold in his coat softened with age. His hips bothered him on damp mornings. Sometimes he rose too quickly and had to stand still for a few seconds, pretending he had meant to pause. Elias never called attention to it. Ranger never asked him to. They lived in a small house outside a quiet town where the wind moved through dry grass instead of pine trees. Elias was 56 tall and broad, shouldered still, but carrying time differently now. Strength remained in him, but it had settled deeper, less eager to prove itself. His faded green military jacket hung by the back door, the same color as old field canvas after too many winters. He wore it on cold mornings because it still knew the shape of him. Retirement did not feel like freedom. It felt like being dismissed from a room before the conversation was finished. At night, the house made sounds he had never noticed when his days were full of orders. Pipes ticking, wind pressing at the eaves, Ranger shifting in his sleep. Elias would wake before dawn with his hand halfway to a weapon that was no longer beside the bed. Then he would sit up, breathe through the old alarm in his chest, and listen to Ranger snore softly on the rug. "You're getting loud," Elias told him one morning. Ranger opened one eye. "Don't look at me like that, you are." The dog closed his eye again, forgiving nothing. It was in late November. On a morning the sky looked flat and metallic, that Elias opened the old footlocker he had not planned to. He was looking for a set of winter gloves, but the gloves were beneath folded uniforms, a cracked compass, old unit patches, and a small plastic bag tucked into the corner. Inside the bag was the strip of wool Martha had tied around Ranger's wounded leg. The scarf fragment had faded to a color between green and gray. One edge was frayed. A small dark stain remained where Ranger's blood had dried 12 years earlier. Elias held it in both hands. The house seemed to grow quiet around him. Ranger lifted his head from the rug. For several seconds the old dog simply stared. Then he stood, slowly, joints stiff, and crossed the room. He touched his nose to the wool. Something changed in him. Not a dramatic thing, no bark, no sudden miracle of youth. Just a stillness, sharp and complete. Ranger inhaled again, and his ears moved forward the way they used to before a search. The years seemed to gather behind his eyes. Elias felt the old shame rise in him, not hot, not loud, but heavy. "I know," he said. Ranger kept his nose against the wool. "I should have gone back." The words sounded foolish in the empty room, because no one had accused him. That was the worst of it. No voice from Martha. No letter asking why he had forgotten. No complaint carried over the years. Only silence, and the memory of a woman cutting her last bread into 3 pieces. Elias sat on the floor beside Ranger because standing felt dishonest. "I sent a letter," he said, as if the dog were a judge. "I did. And some paperwork for help with the roof, I thought." He stopped. Thought what? That gratitude could be mailed and considered done. That an old woman alone on a mountain would somehow be protected by good intentions and a stamp. Ranger lowered himself beside him with a tired grunt. The dog's body was old, but he leaned against Elias with the same trust he had offered in snow. Elias rubbed the silver fur between Ranger's ears. "We go before the first hard storm," he said. Ranger did not move. "That means today, if you're going to be dramatic about it." The old dog's tail thumped once. By noon, Elias had packed the truck, not much. Winter gear, medical kit, Ranger's joint medication, a folded blanket, tools, a thermos, and the wool strip sealed again in its plastic bag. He placed it in the inside pocket of his faded green jacket, close enough that he could feel its corner when he moved. The drive north took most of the day and part of the next. At first, the roads were familiar in the way all American roads could be familiar. Gas stations, diners, fields gone brown under early frost. Then the land began to rise. The sky lowered. Pines appeared along the highway, dark and crowded, and Elias felt his hands tighten on the wheel. Ranger slept through long stretches, waking whenever the truck slowed. At a rest stop near the state line, Elias helped him down carefully. Ranger sniffed the cold air, then looked toward the mountains. "Yeah," Elias said, "I smell it too." He did not know if that was true. He smelled diesel, wet asphalt, and coffee burning somewhere inside the station. But beneath it, or behind it, was something older. Snow not yet fallen, pine sap, the iron scent of cold rock. Near evening on the second day, they reached the small town below the northern range. Elias remembered it as a place with 1 gas pump, 1 diner, and a hardware store that sold more gossip than tools. Now there were signs for scenic rentals, mountain lots, and a future overlook road. Someone had put up a polished wooden board reading, Bell Ridge Development Area, coming soon. The name Bell stopped him. It stood there in clean white letters, as if the mountain itself had already been purchased and renamed by people who had never been caught in a storm on it. Elias parked outside a grocery and feed store with a bell over the door and windows fogged from the heat inside. Ranger stayed in the truck with the window cracked, wrapped in his blanket, watching the entrance as though the years had not retired him from duty. Inside, the store smelled of coffee, dog food, boot rubber, and old wood. A woman in her 60s stood behind the counter, sorting receipts with a pencil tucked behind one ear. She had gray hair cut to her jaw and a face made practical by weather. Her name tag read Linda, though she looked like she had answered to Han and you there for most of her life. She glanced up at Elias. "You're not here for vacation," she said. It was not a question. "No, ma'am." "Good. Vacation people ask if the snow is picturesque. Snow is only picturesque if somebody else shovels it." Elias almost smiled. "I'm looking for Martha Bell." The pencil stopped. That was the first warning. Linda looked at him more carefully now. She took in the faded green military jacket, the square face, the eyes that had not come to browse. Her voice lost its store, counter-brightness. You family? No? Law? No. Then what are you? Elias could have said former Navy SEAL. He could have said the kind of thing people either respected too much or misunderstood completely. Instead, he said the only truth that mattered. Summonin' she helped once. Linda set the receipts down. Outside, Ranger shifted in the truck, his head lifting as if he sensed the change through glass. Linda came around the counter and lowered her voice, though there were only 2 other customers in the store and both were pretending not to listen. Martha's alive, she said. But if you're here to see her, you should have come yesterday. Elias felt the old cold move through him. What happened? Caleb Voss happened. The name meant nothing to Elias then. But Linda said it as if it tasted bad. Her nephew, she continued, showed up after years of sending Christmas cards late and excuses early, says Martha can't live alone anymore, says he's got papers, says he's moving her to a care facility before winter traps her up there. Is she unsafe? Linda's mouth tightened. She's old. That's not the same thing. Elias waited. Linda glanced toward the window, toward the road that climbed into the trees. Land people have been sniffing around Bell Ridge since spring. They want the upper lots for cabins. Maybe some fancy overlook road. Caleb started coming around right after the survey markers appeared. Funny how family gets sentimental when property values rise. Elias's hand moved unconsciously to the inside of his jacket, to the corner of the plastic bag. When is he moving her? Linda's face changed again. Less anger now, more worry. Today. The word landed hard. He told folks the company's survey crew comes tomorrow morning, she said. If he gets her out tonight, there's nobody up there to argue when they start measuring. For a moment, Elias heard nothing but the hum of the store refrigerator. Then Linda added, There's more. Sheriff Harlan went up once last week. Caleb showed him paperwork. Tom didn't like it, but papers make cowards of decent men sometimes. Elias looked through the window at Ranger. The old dog was standing now in the truck bed area, blanket fallen from his shoulders, nose pointed toward the mountain road. He could not have heard Linda's words. He could not have known the name Caleb Voss or what a survey crew meant. But he knew Elias. He knew when the air changed around his handler. Linda followed Elias's gaze and saw Ranger. Her expression softened. That your dog? Yes. He looks like he's been through a war. He has. Linda nodded, as if that explained something and not nearly enough. Elias bought a paper map because relying only on digital routes in mountain country had always felt like trusting a stranger with a bad memory. Linda marked the old service road with a red pen. Road's rough but passable if you know how to drive, she said. Martha's cabin sits above the west bend. If Caleb's truck is still there, don't go in swinging. Elias looked at her. She lifted one eyebrow. Men with your shoulders always need reminding. That time he did smile, but it did not last. At the door, Linda called after him. She fed half this town at one time or another, she said. Never made a speech about it, just put another potato in the pot. Elias paused with his hand on the knob. That was the sentence that stayed with him. Not because it was grand, because it was not. It made Martha real again. Not just a memory in a storm. A woman who stretched soup. A woman who opened doors. A woman who might now be standing alone while someone reduced her life to a signature. Elias stepped outside. The cold had sharpened. Evening was beginning to fall, blue and thin over the roofs. He opened the truck door and helped Ranger down for a moment before the climb. The old dog moved stiffly. But once his paws touched the ground, he faced the mountain road. Elias crouched beside him. You don't have to come all the way up, he said. Ranger looked at him with quiet offense. All right, Elias said. Stupid question. He helped Ranger back into the truck, secured the blanket around him, and started the engine. The road out of town narrowed quickly, Stores and houses gave way to fences, then fields, then pines. The new development signs appeared twice more, each one cleaner than the last, each one making Elias like the place less. Survey ribbons fluttered from branches in bright orange strips, small wounds tied to the trees. The higher he drove, the more the past came back. Not as memory exactly, but as pressure in the body, the bend where a snowplow might have turned. The slope where the wind hit from the west. The dark line of timber where Ranger had once limped beside him. Ranger raised his head and sniffed through the cracked window. "You remember," Elias said. The dog's ears shifted forward. Elias drove faster than he should have, then forced himself to slow down. This was not a raid. Martha did not need him arriving careless and angry. She needed him arriving useful. Still, his jaw tightened as the truck climbed. He had imagined this return differently. In the foolish version, he would knock on Martha's door with flowers, maybe, or groceries, or some repaired piece of gratitude he could carry in both hands. She would open the door, he would say her name. Ranger would recognize her. There would be surprise, then warmth, then perhaps forgiveness for the years lost. But life had a habit of punishing imagined speeches. The first thing Elias saw near the West Bend was not the cabin. It was a suitcase. It lay open in the snow beside the road, one wheel broken, a sleeve of a woman's cardigan hanging out like a small flag of surrender. A bottle of pills had spilled nearby, orange plastic bright against the white ground. Elias stopped the truck. For 1 second he did not move. Ranger made a low sound from the passenger side. Not a bark, not a growl, but something older and more troubled. Elias stepped out into the cold. Up the hill, through the trees. Martha Bell's cabin stood with smoke barely lifting from the chimney. A dark pickup was parked crooked near the porch. A man's voice carried down through the evening air, sharp and impatient. Then, Elias saw her. Martha Bell stood near the porch steps, smaller than memory, wrapped in a gray cardigan and a pale green scarf, one hand gripping the railing, as if the house itself were the only thing keeping her upright. A man in a charcoal coat came out carrying another box of her belongings. Elias had driven nearly 12 years to say thank you. But as he looked at the suitcase in the snow, the words died before they reached his mouth. The suitcase lay open in the snow like something ashamed. A gray cardigan sleeve hung from one side. A pair of worn slippers had fallen near the wheel. A small orange bottle of pills rested half, buried beside the road, its white cap bright against the slush. Elias stared at it for a moment longer than he should have, because small things had a way of telling the truth before people did. Up the hill, Martha Bell's cabin stood where memory had left it, but age had leaned harder on it. One corner of the roof sagged, the porch rail bowed outward. The chimney still breathed smoke, thin and uncertain. Elias had carried that cabin in his mind for 12 years as a place of fire, soup, and survival. Seeing it now with a stranger's truck parked crooked in front, felt like walking into a prayer and finding boot prints across it. Ranger made a low sound from inside the truck. "I see it," Elias said. His voice was quiet, but something in it made Ranger lift his head higher. Elias opened the passenger door and helped the old German shepherd down. Ranger's paws touched the snow carefully. His hips were stiff from the long drive, but once he found his balance, his attention fixed on the porch. The silver around his muzzle made him look older than the storm itself. But the eyes had not changed. They were locked on Martha. She stood beside the porch steps, smaller than Elias remembered, wrapped in a gray cardigan too thin for the cold and a pale green scarf tucked unevenly at her neck. Her white hair was pinned low, but the wind had pulled loose strands across her face. One hand gripped the railing, the other clutched a small wooden box against her chest. A man came out of the cabin carrying a cardboard box. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a charcoal overcoat too polished for a place where firewood still mattered. His hair was light brown and combed neatly to one side. His face had the pale, tight look of someone who spent more time in offices than weather. When he saw Elias, His mouth tightened before he arranged it into a polite smile. "Can I help you?" the man called. Elias did not answer right away. He looked at Martha. She looked back at him without recognition. That struck him harder than expected. 12 years had changed him. Service had drawn deeper lines around his eye. Retirement had not softened his shoulders. The faded green military jacket he wore was old enough to belong to several versions of himself. To Martha, he was not the dying man from her floor. He was just a broad-shouldered stranger standing in her snow. Ranger stepped forward. Martha's eyes dropped to the dog. The change in her face was slight, almost too small to name. Her fingers tightened around the wooden box. She stared at Ranger's silvered muzzle, then at the old scar above his rear hock, half hidden by fur. "Oh," she whispered. The man on the porch heard it and frowned. "Martha," he said too quickly. "Please get in the truck. It's cold." She did not move. Elias started up the slope. Ranger walked beside him, limping a little but steady. "I don't know who you are, but this is a family matter." "Name," Elias said. The man blinked. "Excuse me, your name." "Caleb Voss." He said it with the irritation of someone who expected the name to matter. "I'm Martha's nephew." Elias nodded once. "Elias Mercer." Caleb's eyes moved over him. Jacket, boots, shoulders, dog, and paused at the old military watch on his wrist. "You law enforcement?" "No." "Then you have no business here." Martha's voice came from behind him, thin but clear. "The dog." Caleb turned. "What?" "That dog," Martha said, still staring at Ranger. "I know that dog." For the first time, Caleb looked uneasy. Ranger moved past Elias by half a step. He did not bark. He did not lunge. He simply placed himself where any hand reaching for Martha would first have to pass him. It was a slow movement, almost painful to watch because of his age. But it carried the weight of old training and older loyalty. Caleb gave a short, humorless laugh. "Greet, now we're discussing dogs while my aunt freezes." He turned back to Elias. "She gets confused, that's why I'm here." Elias looked at the belongings scattered in the snow. "She packed like this?" Caleb's smile thinned. "I am helping her move to a safer place. The cabin is structurally unsound, the heat is unreliable, and she's had memory episodes. I have documentation." "Then show it." Caleb hesitated. Not because he lacked papers, but because he disliked being asked. He opened the rear door of his truck and pulled out a black leather document case. It looked expensive and untouched by weather. He removed several papers with the confidence of a man who had practiced this moment. "Power of attorney," Caleb said. "Medical assessment. Property transfer consultation. I'm doing everything legally." Elias took the papers, but did not let his face change. The power of attorney had Martha's name. Her signature trembled across the bottom. The medical assessment described cognitive decline and limited independent capacity. The property papers referred to relocation, management, and development interest in Bell Ridge. Too clean. That was the first thing Elias thought. War had taught him that danger often announced itself with noise. Age had taught him something else. Some of the worst things came polished, stapled, and notarized. Behind Caleb, Martha bent to pick up a photograph that had fallen from the wooden box. The wind caught it. She reached too slowly. Caleb turned sharply. "Aunt Martha, leave that. I told you I'll handle." He grabbed for the wooden box. Martha held on. The struggle lasted less than 2 seconds, but that was enough. The box slipped from her hands and hit the porch step. Its lid cracked open. Photographs spilled across the snow, dusted boards. Ranger growled. It was not loud. That made it worse. Caleb froze. Elias moved 1 step forward. "Don't touch her again." Caleb's face flushed. "You have no idea what you're walking into. I know what I'm looking at." No, you don't. You're seeing an old woman upset because change is hard. I'm seeing months of unpaid repairs, stove issues, missed medication, and a woman who cannot keep living up here alone because sentimental locals would rather let her freeze than admit she needs help. It was well said that irritated Elias more than shouting would have. Caleb had the voice for it, reasonable, tired, almost wounded by other people's suspicion. He was not playing the villain, he was playing the responsible relative. And for a second, Elias understood how people in town might have stepped aside, not because they believed Caleb fully, but because paperwork and a calm voice could make cruelty look like procedure. Martha lowered herself carefully to one knee and gathered the photographs. Elias saw her hand shake, not with confusion. With humiliation, that was the moment his anger became dangerous. He felt it move through him, old and disciplined, looking for a target. He wanted to grab Caleb by the collar and put him against the truck. He wanted to explain, in the blunt language of men who had outlived too many storms, that no document in the world gave a man permission to throw an old woman's medicine into the snow. Instead, he took out his phone. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "Who are you calling, Sheriff?" "That's unnecessary." "Then it'll be quick." Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, Mercer, you don't know this family. You don't know her condition. If you interfere with a lawful relocation, you could be creating liability for yourself." Elias looked at him then. Really looked. Caleb's coat was clean, but his cuffs were damp from handling Martha's things. His gloves were black leather, thin and neat. His eyes were pale blue, not empty, exactly, but arranged around self-interest so carefully that nothing warmer could get through. "Mr. Voss," Elias said, "I've been liable for worse." The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later in a brown Winter Department SUV with one headlight slightly dimmer than the other. He climbed out slowly, a heavy man near 60 with assault, and pepper mustache, tired gray, brown eyes, and a sheriff's hat he removed. The moment he saw Martha on the porch. "Evening, Martha," he said. "Tom," she replied. There was history in the way she said his name. Not affection exactly, but familiarity worn thin. Sheriff Tom Harlan took in the scene, the open suitcase, the pills, Ranger standing by Martha, Elias beside the truck, Caleb holding the black document case like a shield. "Caleb," Tom said, "Sheriff, thank God this man is interfering with family arrangements." Tom's mouth tightened. He looked at Elias. "You the one who called?" "Yes. You know Mrs. Bell? I owe her my life." That answer shifted something in the air. Tom did not ask for details yet. Maybe he had lived long enough in small towns to know that some sentences needed time before they could be touched. Caleb began explaining. He spoke smoothly, showing papers, pointing to the medical assessment, using words like safety, transition, and best interest. Tom listened with the expression of a man who had heard too many disputes where every side carried a version of the truth. Elias waited. Waiting was harder than action. At one point Martha tried to speak, but Caleb talked over her. "She doesn't always understand the sequence of events," he said. Martha's face closed. Elias saw it happen, a little door inside her shutting. He stepped in then, not loudly. "Sheriff, I want a report filed that Mrs. Bell's belongings and medication were placed outside and below. Freezing weather during a disputed relocation. I want the condition of those items documented. I want the papers copied, and I want her asked, without interruption, whether she wants to leave tonight." Caleb scoffed. "That is absurd." Tom looked at him. "Let her answer." Caleb opened his mouth. Tom's voice hardened. "I said let her answer." For the first time Sheriff Harlan sounded less tired. Martha stood on the porch with one hand on the railing. The wind tugged at her scarf. Ranger leaned lightly against her leg, and Elias wondered if the dog knew he was holding her up. "No," Martha said. "It was not dramatic. It was barely more than breath. Tom stepped closer. "No, you don't want to leave tonight." "No," Martha repeated. "I do not." Caleb exhaled sharply. "She doesn't understand," she answered, Tom said. The silence that followed was small but important. Tom could not solve the matter there. Caleb had papers. The cabin might indeed have safety issues. Martha's capacity could not be judged on a porch in the cold, but he could slow the damage. He photographed the scattered belongings, the pills, the broken wheel on the suitcase, the cracked photograph box. He took copies of Caleb's documents with a portable scanner from his vehicle. He wrote down Martha's statement. Caleb's politeness began to fray. "This delay could cost her a proper placement," he said. Tom put his pen away. "Then you can explain that tomorrow through the correct channels. She can't stay here." Elias spoke before Tom could. "She won't." Everyone looked at him. He turned to Martha. "Not tonight. Not until someone looks at these papers properly. There's a cabin down the hill. I'll rent it. Warm bed. Lock on the door. You decide what happens next when you're not freezing and being rushed." Martha studied him. There it was again, the searching look. Her eyes moved from Elias's face to Ranger, then down to the old scar on the dog's leg. "You were younger," she said. Elias swallowed. "Yes, ma'am." "So was the dog." Ranger wagged his tail once, slowly, as if accepting the charge. Martha's mouth trembled. Not enough to be a smile, not enough to be grief. Something in between, where recognition begins, but does not yet know where to stand. "I remember blood on my scarf," she said. Elias felt the cold go out of the air for one strange second. He touched the inside pocket of his jacket but did not take the wool strip out. Not yet. This was not the moment to ask memory to do too much. "Yes," he said, "you saved him." Martha looked at Ranger. He was so serious about it. "He still is, Ranger." As if insulted by being discussed, lowered himself slowly beside Martha's boots. Tom cleared his throat, pretending not to be moved. "Martha, do you agree to go to the cabin for the night?" She looked back at her house. That look hurt to watch. The cabin was not just a building. It was Samuel's photograph on the mantel. It was bread cut thin. It was winters survived by habit and stubbornness. It was the last place where she could still move through rooms, without explaining who she had been. "I don't want him inside alone," she said, meaning Caleb. Tom nodded. "I'll secure it. No one goes in tonight except by my say." "So," Caleb laughed once, "you cannot bar me from property I have authority to manage." Tom turned to him. "I can stand here until you decide not to make this worse." Caleb stared at him. Then he closed the black leather case with a sharp snap. Elias gathered Martha's things carefully. Not quickly. Carefully. He picked up the pills, brushed snow from the photographs, placed the cardigan back into the suitcase, and set the cracked wooden box on top. Ranger tried to stand and help in the only way he knew, by positioning himself between Martha and Caleb, but his rear leg trembled. Elias saw it. Martha saw it too. "He needs warmth," she said. "So do you," Elias replied. She gave him a look with a flicker of the woman who had once scolded him half-conscious on her floor. "I did not ask about me." For the first time that evening, Elias almost smiled. Nora Vale's rental cabin sat under the pines below the ridge, where the hill softened before dropping toward town. Tom radioed ahead. Linda from the store must have called someone too, because by the time Elias's truck pulled in behind Tom's SUV, a porch light was already on. Nora opened the door before they knocked. She was in her early 40s, compact and steady, with chestnut, brown hair tied low and a red scarf hanging loose over a canvas coat lined in fleece. A ring of cabin keys hung from her belt and clicked softly when she moved. She looked first at Martha, then at Ranger, then at Elias, and made her decision before anyone finished explaining. "Cabin 3 has a working stove," she said. "Beds made. Kettles on?" How much? Elias asked. Nora looked at Martha's thin cardigan and the cracked photo box in Elias's hands. For tonight, she said. Nora Vale, don't you dare make charity sound like bookkeeping? Nora smiled, but her eyes shone. Yes, ma'am. The cabin was small, with pine walls, a braided rug, a black iron stove, and windows facing the dark road up the hill. It smelled of cedar, dust, and the first heat of a newly lit fire. It was not home. Everyone knew that. But it had a door that locked from the inside, and that mattered. Martha sat near the stove with both hands around a mug of tea. Ranger lay across the threshold after Elias helped him inside, his silver muzzle resting on his paws, eyes fixed toward the road. Every few minutes, his ears twitched at sounds no one else heard. Tom left after promising to patrol past Martha's cabin once more. Nora brought extra blankets without being asked. Caleb did not follow them down the hill, but Elias had the feeling of him somewhere above them, arranging his papers back into order, making new plans. Only after Martha's breathing deepened in sleep did Elias open the paper grocery bag she had clutched through the drive. Inside were tax receipts, insurance notices, an old copy of Samuel Bell's will, brittle letters tied with string, the power of attorney, and the medical assessment Caleb had waved like a weapon. Elias spread them on the small kitchen table beneath a yellow lamp. The papers smelled of dust and cold storage. He studied the power of attorney first. Martha's signature shook across the bottom. Then he compared it to a tax form from years earlier. Different pressure, different spacing. Maybe age could explain some of it. Maybe fear could explain more. But something about it looked wrong. He moved to the medical assessment. The doctor's address was from a town 40 miles away. Elias looked toward Martha, asleep in the chair. Now, the mug still near her hands. You ever meet him? He asked softly, not expecting an answer. For a second he thought she had not understood. Then she said, very quietly, no. That single word changed the room. Elias looked back down at the papers. At the bottom of the bag beneath the receipts was a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges. It had been opened once, then tucked away again. The return address was his old unit support office. His name was typed in the upper corner. The postmark was 11 years old. Elias held it without breathing. Across the room, Ranger lifted his head. The cabin stove cracked softly. Outside, the road up to Martha's house disappeared into darkness. And for the first time that night, Elias understood Caleb had not acted in a moment of impatience. Someone had been keeping things from Martha for years. Morning came without warmth. The rental cabin under the hill held the kind of quiet that followed a bad night. The stove had burned low. A gray line of light slipped through the curtains and lay across the pine floorboards. Outside, the road up to Martha Bell's cabin disappeared between black pines, as if the mountain had swallowed the argument from the night before and was waiting to see what the living would do with it. Martha slept in the armchair beside the stove with a quilt over her knees. She had refused the bed at first, saying it was too fine for a woman who had spent half her life sleeping through wind-rattling old windows. Nora Vale had answered that the bed did not have an opinion. Martha had almost smiled at that. But exhaustion took her before pride could finish its work. Ranger lay across the doorway. The old German shepherd had chosen the place himself, between Martha and the outside world. His silver muzzle rested on his paws, but his eyes opened every time a branch clicked against the cabin wall. Elias sat at the small kitchen table, with Martha's papers spread before him. He had seen maps of hostile compounds that looked less dangerous. Tax receipts, insurance notices, a copy of Samuel Bell's will, old utility bills, a medical assessment signed by a doctor from another town, a power of attorney with Martha's name printed cleanly and her signature shaking at the bottom, property consultation forms, a notice about survey access, and, near his left hand, the opened envelope bearing the return address of his old unit support office. 11 years old, Elias had not opened the letter yet. He knew what was inside because he had written it, or at least he knew what the man he had been had tried to say. He remembered sitting on the edge of a cot under a buzzing light, Ranger asleep with his bandaged legs stretched out, and trying to thank a woman without making the words sound like a report. Now the letter lay in front of him, yellowed and late, like a witness ashamed to arrive after the verdict. His phone vibrated. Elias answered before the second buzz. Mercer. A woman's voice came through, alert and unsoftened by the early hour. This is Grace Whitcomb. You left a message with the Veterans Legal Clinic. Elias sat straighter. Yes, ma'am. Don't ma'am me unless you plan to ignore advice. I hear that tone from men who think politeness is a substitute for following instructions. It was the first thing she said to him, and Elias knew immediately why his former teammate had recommended her. Grace Whitcomb did not waste weather on pleasantries. She was in her early 50s, though Elias had only seen her once before on a video call years ago. He remembered dark hair with a clean silver streak near one temple, a narrow face, and eyes that looked as if they could read both the document and the person hiding behind it. She had spent years helping older veterans, widows, and rural families keep homes that smoother people tried to take from them. She did not sound sentimental. That made Elias trust her more. Tell me what you have, Grace said, Elias told her. He kept it factual. Martha's age, Caleb's claim, the power of attorney, the medical assessment, the property interest, the attempted relocation, Sheriff Tom's report, the belongings in the snow. He did not tell her about the bread cut into 3 pieces. He did not tell her about Martha's hands around the tea mug. Some facts belonged in court. Others belonged somewhere deeper and more dangerous. Grace listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "Photograph everything. Every page, front and back, include envelopes, include postmarks, include the condition of the medication bottles and belongings, if you have images from last night." Sheriff took photos. Good. Get copies if he'll provide them. Then go to the county recorder's office. I want the deed history, any recent filings, any liens, and anything connected to transfer or management of the property. Do not confront Caleb again unless absolutely necessary. Elias looked toward the dark road outside. He's not done. Men like that rarely are. That's why you do not hand him a clean story where he gets to say the angry stranger threatened him. Your advantage is patience. Elias almost laughed. Head. That's never been my best subject. It will be today. He looked at Martha's sleeping face. The lines around her mouth had softened in rest, but one hand still gripped the edge of the quilt, as if someone might take that too. What can we do? Elias asked. If there are irregularities, we may be able to request a temporary order to freeze any transaction until capacity and authority are reviewed. But suspicion is not enough. I need cracks in the paper. There are cracks, then photograph them. The call ended with no promise of rescue, no grand declaration that everything would be all right. Elias appreciated that false comfort was just another kind of noise. He began with the power of attorney. The paper itself was clean, almost too clean. Caleb had kept it in a protective sleeve. Martha's signature drifted at the bottom, uneven and thin, as if written by a hand that either trembled from weakness or had been guided by fear. Elias placed it beside a tax form from 6 years earlier. On that older form, Martha's signature was small but firm. The B and bell looped with a stubborn flourish. The new signature had no flourish. He photographed both. Then the medical assessment. It stated that Martha Bell showed signs of cognitive decline, poor judgment, and unsafe independent living conditions. The language was careful, not harsh, not dramatic. That made it more useful. It did not call Martha incompetent outright. It only made her sound uncertain enough that someone else could step in. The doctor's office address was 40 miles away. Elias glanced toward Martha. Her eyes were open now. You need something? He asked. No, she said. Her voice was rough from sleep, but clear. He held up the medical assessment. Do you know a Dr. Albright in Dunmere? Martha frowned. I know a dentist named Albright. He died before Nixon did. Despite himself, Elias smiled. This one signed a medical assessment about you. I never met him. Not once? If I met a doctor 40 miles away, I'd remember at my age. Any trip that long requires snacks and a grudge. The humor landed softly, but beneath it was something else. Fear beginning to understand the shape of itself. Elias photographed the document. Martha watched him for a moment. Are you going to read all of them? Yes. That sounds awful. It is. Good. Then I'm glad it's not me. Ranger lifted his head as if he agreed with Martha. Elias opened the old letter last. The envelope had been slit along the top years ago. The paper inside was creased once, then folded again badly, not the way Elias folded letters. Someone had read it in a hurry and shoved it back. He pulled it out. Dear Mrs. Bell, you may not remember me clearly. My name is Elias Mercer. You found me and my K-9 partner during the storm near the West Service Road last winter. He stopped. The room seemed to tilt slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice. Just enough for the past to step in. Martha sat very still. Elias continued reading silently. His own words looked strange to him, younger and more hopeful than he felt now. He had written about Ranger's recovery. He had written that the dog limped in cold weather, but remained proud enough to deny it. He had written that no medal he had ever seen meant as much as the simple fact that Martha had opened her door. Near the bottom, he had included information for a rural repair assistance program, and a note that someone from the Veterans Outreach Office might contact her about weatherproofing the cabin before the next winter. Martha's voice was small. You wrote? Elias looked up. Yes, I never saw it, I know. No, she said, and there was a tremor now that had nothing to do with age. I mean, I would have remembered. Elias folded the letter carefully, because he needed something to do with his hands. I believe you. Martha looked toward the stove. The fire had fallen into red coals. Caleb was helping with mail that year. I broke my wrist in March, slipped on the back step. He came around for a while, brought groceries twice. Made me feel foolish for thanking him too much. Elias said nothing. He said he'd put things in order, she continued. Bills, notices, all that nonsense Samuel used to understand. I let him. I was tired. That last sentence hurt more than an excuse would have. I was tired, not confused, not foolish, tired. A woman could survive storms, grief, thin winters, and the ache of old bones, and still be undone by one relative who arrived when she no longer had strength to question every paper placed before her. Elias set the letter down. The anger came then, not as fire, but as pressure. It pushed behind his ribs. He could see Caleb at the porch, polished and reasonable, saying safety and transition and best interest. He could see Martha's medicine in the snow. He could see his own letter trapped for 11 years in someone else's drawer. He had told himself he failed by not writing again. Now he knew the failure was more complicated, and somehow worse. He had sent gratitude into the world and then trusted the world to deliver it. Ranger struggled to stand. His rear legs trembled. Elias rose immediately, but Martha was faster with her voice. Don't fuss at him, she said. I wasn't. You were about to. Ranger took 2 stiff steps and came to Martha's chair. He rested his head against her knee. She placed her hand on his silver muzzle. Her fingers found the old scar on his leg as if memory lived in touch rather than thought. You got old, she whispered. Ranger sighed. Happens to the best of us, Martha said. Elias watched them and felt something in his chest loosen and tighten at the same time. Ranger had crossed battlefields, training grounds, airports, barracks, and hospital rooms. Yet here, in a rental cabin under a hill, with an old woman's hand on his head, he looked as if he had finally returned to a place he had been carrying without knowing. The day became work. Elias drove to the county recorder's office, while Nora stayed with Martha and Ranger. The office occupied the back of a brick municipal building that smelled faintly of toner and wet coats. A clerk with reading glasses on a chain gave Elias the careful look of someone who had seen family property disputes turn normal people into weather systems. He requested deed history, recent filings, lien records, and any transfer notices tied to the Bell property. Paper emerged slowly. Rural government moved at a speed that suggested eternity had once applied for a permit there. What Elias found did not prove everything, but it proved enough to make his instincts stand up. The Bell property had remained in Martha's name after Samuel's death. No full transfer had occurred. A power of attorney had been recorded only 9 months earlier. A notice of proposed survey access had been sent to Caleb Voss's mailing address. A preliminary agreement with North Star Ridge Holdings had been filed as pending authority confirmation. Pending authority confirmation? Elias stared at the phrase. It was the kind of language that let people stand close to wrongdoing, without stepping all the way into it. He photographed the filings and sent them to Grace. Her reply came 15 minutes later. Good. This gives us a path. Need witness statements. Need sheriff report. Need medical issue documented. Do not let Caleb get her signature on anything else. When Elias returned to the rental cabin, Nora was splitting kindling by the woodshed with the brisk anger of someone who needed a task, or she would start saying things that could not be unsaid. Nora Vale moved like a woman accustomed to fixing problems before men finished discussing them. Her chestnut hair was tied low, her canvas coat dusted with wood shavings, and the key ring at her belt clicked every time she swung the hatchet. He came back only after the survey flags went up, she said, not looking at Elias. Caleb. The hatchet came down. Before that, Martha could have fallen through the porch and he'd have sent a sympathy card with the wrong date. You knew, I suspected. She split another piece. That's the coward's cousin, isn't it? Suspecting. Elias did not answer. He knew too well the shame of realizing too late that a suspicion had been a duty in disguise. Inside, Martha was folding towels at the small table. Nora had clearly told her to rest. Martha had clearly ignored her. Ranger lay nearby, watching the towel pile as if it might threaten someone. Sheriff Tom Harlan stopped by near dusk. He did not come in at first. He stood on the porch, hat in hand, looking larger and more tired than he had the night before. Snow had melted on the shoulders of his brown winter department coat. In one hand he carried a plastic bag of ice melt. For the steps, he said gruffly when Elias opened the door. Elias looked at the bag. Tom cleared his throat. Get slick, Martha called from inside. Tom Harlan, if you brought guilt in with that salt, leave both by the door. Nora laughed once from the stove. Tom's ears reddened. He stepped in and set the bag near the entry. I should have pushed harder when Caleb first brought those papers. Martha folded another towel. Yes. Tom looked down. Then she added, but you're here now. That was Martha's gift and her burden. She could name the wrong and still leave a chair open for the person trying to return from it. Tom gave Elias copies of the incident report and the photos from the night before. He also promised to write a supplemental note that Martha had clearly stated she did not wish to leave the property that night. It won't settle the legal side, Tom said. No, Elias replied. But it matters. Tom nodded. Grace Whitcomb called me? That fast? She speaks like a woman who charges by the syllable. Elias almost smiled. Tom did not. She thinks Caleb may try to push the signing before any order can land. The cabin seemed to grow smaller. Martha heard it. Her hands stopped over the towels. Elias's phone vibrated at the same time. A message from Grace. Caleb moved the signing appointment tonight. 8 p.m. private notary. Likely trying to finalize authority before injunction filing. Need Martha safe and unsigned. Elias read it twice. Not because he did not understand. Because he did. Ranger lifted his head from the floor, ears forward, old body suddenly alert. Martha looked from Elias to Tom to Nora. No one had spoken yet, but the room had changed. She knew the feeling of people trying to protect her from bad news. Old people often knew that feeling too well. "What is it?" she asked. Elias put the phone down slowly. "Caleb isn't." Outside, wind moved through the pines under a darkening sky. The road up to Martha's cabin was already losing daylight. Somewhere above them, a man with clean papers and dirty intentions was trying to finish what he had started before anyone could stop him properly. Elias reached into his jacket pocket and touched the old strip of wool. For 12 years it had been a reminder of the life Martha saved. Tonight, it felt like a promise being called due. Caleb Voss did not shout at first. That was what made his calls worse. The first voicemail came before breakfast, while pale light was still crawling through the curtains of the rented cabin under the hill. Martha sat by the stove with a blanket over her lap, pretending not to watch Elias refill Ranger's water bowl. The old German shepherd drank slowly, then rested his silver muzzle against the edge of the dish, as if even thirst had become a task requiring discipline. Martha's phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it, but did not reach for it. Elias saw Caleb's name on the screen. "Do you want me to answer?" he asked. "No," Martha said. The phone stopped. A moment later, a voicemail notification appeared. Then another call came. By the third call, Nora Vale had stepped in from the porch with a bundle of firewood in her arms, and that hard little line around her mouth that appeared whenever kindness met stupidity. "Want me to throw that phone in the snow?" Nora asked. Martha gave her a tired look. "That is not how adults solve problems." "No," Nora said, dropping the wood beside the stove. "But it is how some adults get peace." Martha almost smiled. But the phone buzzed again. This time Elias picked it up, not to answer, only to silence it. "He wants you rattled before anyone can help. He always did like arriving before breakfast," Martha murmured. There was history in that sentence. Not enough to explain everything, but enough to show that Caleb had not become this man overnight. He had been practicing smaller versions of himself for years. Elias played the first voicemail on speaker only after Martha nodded. Caleb's voice filled the cabin, smooth and wounded. "Aunt Martha, I know this is confusing. I know that man has made you feel protected, but you need to understand something. He does not know our family, he does not know your health, your finances, or what happens when winter truly sets in. I am trying to prevent you from losing everything." The second voicemail was softer. "If you refuse to cooperate, the buyers may withdraw. Then the bills remain. The repairs remain. The county may get involved. Do you want strangers deciding where you live?" The third one was sharper. "You are letting a soldier you met once years ago interfere with your future. If he cared so much, where was he all this time?" That one landed. Not on Martha, on Elias. He stood very still beside the table. Caleb had aimed at Martha, but the arrow found an old bruise in him. Where was he all this time? It was a cruel question because cruelty did not need to invent a lie when a truth could be sharpened. Martha looked up at him. "Don't you dare take that into yourself," she said. Elias said nothing. "I mean it," she added. "I have enough trouble without you making that face." Nora looked between them. "What face?" "The martyr face," Martha said. "Military men get it when they want forgiveness, but would rather be shot than ask." Ranger lifted his head, as if confirming this diagnosis. Despite the pressure in the room, Nora let out one short laugh. Elias did not laugh. He sat across from Martha and placed the phone face down on the table. "He's trying to make you feel alone," he said. "That's how he gets your signature." Martha's fingers worried the edge of the blanket. "I am tired, Elias." It was the first time she had said his name as if she fully knew where it belonged. "I know. No. I mean tired in the bones, tired of forms, tired of people lowering their voices when I walk in. Tired of being asked if I understand things I understood before they were born." She looked toward the window where the road curved up through the pines toward her real home. "Maybe I should go. A house is only wood, stone, and an old roof that complains more than I do." Elias did not answer right away. A younger version of him would have argued. He would have given reasons, listed facts, promised victory. He would have mistaken urgency for strength. Instead, he got up, put water on the stove, and made tea the way Martha had shown him the night before. Bag first, water second, no drowning it in sugar, unless one wanted to insult the leaves. He set the mug in front of her. "If it is only wood and stone," he said, "why does Caleb need to lie to take it?" Martha's hand stopped around the mug. The fire popped softly. Nora, standing by the counter, looked down as if giving the question room to work. Martha did not answer. She did not need to. The truth had entered quietly and sat down among them. Grace Whitcomb called at 9:17. Elias put her on speaker this time, with Martha's permission. Grace's voice came through crisp and awake. The voice of a woman who had probably been working since before sunrise, and had no patience for dramatic despair. "I filed the emergency petition," Grace said. "The judge granted a temporary restraining order against any transfer, sale, or encumbrance of the Bell property pending review." Nora whispered. "Thank God," Grace continued. "Do not celebrate. This is not a verdict. It is a pause, a very useful pause, but still a pause." Martha looked at the phone. "Does that mean he can't sell my house today?" "It means he cannot lawfully sell, transfer, or force relocation connected to the property while the order is active," Grace said. "It also means he should not attempt to obtain further signatures from you regarding the property without counsel present." Martha took that in. Elias watched her face change not into happiness, exactly, but into the cautious expression of a person who had been handed back one breath. Grace added, "Sheriff Harlan is bringing a copy to you and serving Caleb separately. I want you somewhere safe until he confirms service." "She's at the rented cabin," Elias said. "Good, keep her there until Tom arrives." Grace paused. "And Mr. Mercer?" "Yes? Do not go looking for Caleb." Elias glanced toward the window. "I heard you." "That is not the same as agreeing," Martha said. "He'll behave. I'll hit him with my cane if he doesn't." Grace was silent for half a second. "Mrs. Bell, I already like you." By noon, Sheriff Tom Harlan's SUV rolled into the clearing below the cabin. He came up the steps carrying a folder in one hand and his hat in the other. Snow clung to his boots. His face looked older in daylight, not weak, just worn by the knowledge that he had spent too long mistaking paperwork for truth. Martha stood before he could tell her not to. Tom removed his hat completely and held it against his coat. "Martha," he said, "Grace asked me to bring you a copy, the order's in place." He handed her the papers. She did not take them immediately. For years, papers had been used against her. Folded, explained, withheld, pushed across tables by men who sounded helpful. Now a paper was supposed to protect her. It was understandable that her hand did not trust it right away. Elias saw that and did not step in. Tom did. "I should have looked harder the first time Caleb brought his documents," he said. The cabin went quiet. Tom's eyes stayed on Martha, not on Elias, not on Nora. "I saw papers and told myself it was complicated. It was complicated, but that didn't make it right to step back." Martha took the folder then. "You brought salt last night," she said. Tom blinked, thrown by the turn. "For the steps. I know what it was for." Her voice was not sharp, only tired. "You were apologizing with a bag because your mouth had not caught up yet." Nora turned away to hide a smile. Tom looked down at his hat. "Yes, ma'am." Martha opened the folder. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes were clear. "I accept the salt," she said, "and the apology." Tom nodded once, and for a moment the big sheriff looked like a boy allowed back onto a porch after breaking a window. It would have been easy then to make it a victory. To turn the cabin warm and the order into a shield no one could crack. But life did not move that cleanly. Caleb had not been arrested. The property was not safe forever. The documents still had to be reviewed. The doctor questioned. The signatures examined. The company notified. The order gave Martha time, not peace. Still, time mattered. Sometimes time was the first mercy. Tom confirmed Caleb had been served at his temporary rental office near town. Caleb had argued, threatened complaints, and accused everyone involved of elder manipulation. "He say anything about coming here?" Elias asked. Tom's jaw tightened. "Not directly. That means yes. It means lock the door and call me if he does. I'll circle back after I file the service confirmation." Martha looked toward the road up the hill. "Can I go home?" No one answered quickly. That silence hurt her more than refusal would have. "My house," she said. And this time her voice had iron under the age. "I want to see what he did to my house." Grace had said the order allowed her to return. But Elias knew the difference between allowed and wise. Caleb was angry. The cabin was damaged. The locks might not hold, yet keeping Martha away from her home too long would do another kind of harm. Protection could become another cage, if the protector was careless. Elias crouched beside Ranger and checked the old dog's eyes, gums, and rear legs. Ranger looked offended by the examination. "You up for a ride?" Elias asked. Ranger pushed himself to his feet slowly. Martha watched him. "He has more pride than sense." "So do some people," Nora said, glancing at Elias. They went up together, Tom in front, Elias behind with Martha and Ranger. Nora following in her old pickup with blankets, cleaning supplies, and a toolbox she claimed had appeared by itself. Martha's cabin looked worse in afternoon light. The porch steps were slick. One lock had been bent where Caleb had forced it earlier. The kitchen window had been left unlatched. A wet patch spread across the floor beneath a leak near the stovepipe. A stack of firewood had been knocked into the snow, where half of it was already damp. Martha stood in the doorway and did not move. Elias had seen men return to bombed rooms with that same look. Not shock, not even grief. The mind trying to reconcile the sacred place it carried with the damaged place in front of it. "It smells cold," Martha said. No one told her that made no sense. Everyone in that doorway understood it. Elias stepped in first, not as an owner, not as a rescuer taking command, but as a man checking danger. He moved through the rooms, opened closet doors, checked windows, looked for anything Caleb might have left behind or taken. Ranger followed as far as the kitchen, then lowered himself near the doorway to Martha's bedroom. That was where he chose to lie, not by Elias, by Martha's room. Tom noticed. "That dog knows his job." "He always did," Elias said. So he did only what could be justified as safety and emergency stabilization. He replaced the damaged lock with a temporary one, keeping the receipt. He photographed the old lock first. He set a plastic basin beneath the leak and patched the roof edge from outside just enough to stop snowmelt from dripping into the kitchen. He re-stacked dry firewood under the porch overhang. He salted the steps. He braced the loose porch rail with a spare board from the shed. Small things, necessary things. The kind of work no one applauded but everyone depended on. Nora cleaned the spilled medicine from the floor and set Martha's pill bottles in a neat row on the kitchen shelf. Tom checked the exterior doors and wrote notes in his small pad. Martha moved slowly through the rooms, touching objects as if counting survivors after a storm. Samuel's chair, the stove handle, the chipped blue bowl, the mantel where the old photograph usually stood. "The photo box," she said suddenly. Elias brought it from the truck. The wooden lid was cracked, but the contents were dry. Martha sat at the kitchen table and opened it with both hands. She lifted a photograph of Samuel Bell in his winter military jacket. Her thumb moved over his face. "He hated having his picture taken," she said. "Said cameras made honest men look guilty." Nora smiled from the counter. Maybe he was right. Martha's smile faded but did not vanish. She looked at Ranger, who had raised his head from the bedroom door. Then she leaned forward slightly. "Come here," she said. Ranger tried to rise. His hind legs shook. Elias moved to help, but Martha lifted one finger. Let him decide what he can do. So Elias stopped. Ranger stood slowly, painfully, and crossed the kitchen. Every step seemed to cost him something. But he came to Martha and placed his head beneath her hand. She ran her fingers along his muzzle, over the silver fur, then down toward the rear leg where the old scar lay beneath the coat. "The dog in the storm," she whispered. Elias felt something inside him go still. He took the plastic bag from his inner pocket. This time, he opened it. The faded wool strip lay in his palm. Martha looked at it for a long time. At first, her face showed no recognition. Then her mouth parted slightly, and the hand on Ranger's head began to tremble. "My scarf," she said. "Yes, I thought I threw that piece in the stove." "No, ma'am." "You kept it?" Elias nodded. Words rose in him: apology, gratitude, regret, explanations about letters and years and duty. None of them seemed clean enough. Her fingertips rested there lightly, as if touching a bruise. "You were dying," she said. "So was he. I was angry at you both." That surprised him. Martha's eyes sharpened with old memory. "Coming to my road, half-frozen, bleeding on my sled, making me waste good soup. Very inconsiderate." Nora laughed softly. Elias looked down, and for the first time since finding the suitcase in the snow, his chest loosened. "I'm sorry about the soup," he said. "You should be. It had barley in it." Barley is not exciting, but it is dependable. For a few minutes, the house warmed in a way no stove could manage alone. Martha did not cry. Elias was grateful for that. Not because tears would have embarrassed him, but because this moment did not belong to sorrow only. It belonged to something stranger. 12 lost years folding back toward the night that had begun them. Then Tom's radio cracked. He stepped away to answer, his smile fading as he listened. Elias saw it happen. Tom turned toward the window. "What?" Elias asked. Tom lowered the radio. "Caleb left town office half an hour ago. Deputy saw his truck heading north before losing sight near the Ridge Road." Nora went still. Martha's hand tightened on the wool strip. Outside, late afternoon had begun to dim. Snow fell again, light at first, then thickening in the wind. Ranger raised his head toward the front door. His ears came forward, not with panic, with recognition of approach. At the far end of the road below the cabin, headlights appeared between the pines, one vehicle, climbing fast. Elias folded the wool strip once and placed it back into his pocket. Then he stood. The temporary order had bought them time. Caleb was coming to spend it. Caleb Voss came up the hill too fast. His headlights cut through the falling snow in hard white bars, sweeping across the cabin windows, across the porch rail Elias had braced only hours earlier. Across Ranger's old body as the German shepherd rose from his place near Martha's bedroom door. The cabin changed at once. A moment before, it had been tired but almost peaceful. The stove burned low. Nora had left a pot of stew on the counter before driving back down to her rental office. Sheriff Tom Harlan had gone to file the service confirmation and check on Caleb's reaction to the temporary order. Martha had been sitting at the kitchen table with Samuel's cracked photo box in front of her. One hand still resting near the faded strip of wool Elias had shown her. Then Ranger stood, not quickly. Age would not allow that. His rear legs trembled beneath him, and for a second, Elias thought the old dog might fall. But Ranger caught himself, lifted his silver muzzle, and faced the front door. Martha saw it. "He hears him," she said. Elias moved to the window and looked out. Caleb's charcoal coat was already visible through the windshield. He killed the engine but left the lights on. as if he wanted the whole house to know he had arrived. Snow blew sideways between the truck and the porch. Elias took out his phone and sent one message to Sheriff Tom. "Caleb here, Bell Cabin. Come now." Then he called Grace Whitcomb and left the line open on speaker. Volume low, placing the phone face down near the window ledge. Grace answered on the second ring. "Is he there?" "Yes, do not threaten him," she said. "I know. No, Mr. Mercer. You know how not to hit him. That is not the same thing." Elias looked toward Martha. Her hands were steady on the table now. Not because she was unafraid, but because fear had finally grown old enough inside her to sit still. "I'll keep the line open," Grace said. "If he attempts to obtain a signature, make him say what the document is." Caleb knocked once, then opened the door without waiting. That told Elias everything. A man who believed he was welcome knocked differently than a man who believed he owned the room. Cold entered with him. Caleb carried a black leather folder under one arm. Snow clung to his shoulders. His hair, so neat the day before, had been disturbed by wind. That small disorder made him look more dangerous, not less. His politeness had lost its coat. "Aunt Martha," he said, ignoring Elias at first, "we need to fix what these people have done." Martha did not rise. "Good evening, Caleb." The calmness of her greeting irritated him. "You should not be here," Caleb said. "This house is unsafe, and now you have outsiders manipulating you into violating a care plan." Elias stepped between Caleb and the table, not close enough to threaten, close enough to make a line. "There's a temporary order in place," he said. "I know exactly what is in place," Caleb snapped. "And I know exactly how it was obtained." An elderly woman under emotional pressure from a stranger. A soldier with a dog and a story. A small-town sheriff trying to save face. It will not hold. From the phone on the ledge, Grace's voice remained silent, listening. Caleb set the black folder on the kitchen counter and opened it. He took out a thin stack of papers clipped together. "I am not here to sell anything tonight," he said too loudly. "I am here so Aunt Martha can clarify that she has been pressured. She signs this statement, and tomorrow we can start untangling the mess Mr. Mercer created." Martha looked at the papers. Elias did too. "What statement?" he asked. Caleb smiled without warmth. A simple declaration that she was confused, distressed, and influenced by parties who do not understand her medical situation. "Parties," Elias said. "You, Mr. Mercer." Ranger gave a low rumble. Caleb's eyes flicked toward the dog, and apparently the animal has opinions too. "Careful," Elias said. Caleb laughed once. "What is he now? 16, 17. That dog can barely stand. Stop using him like a war banner." The words struck the room strangely. Elias felt them, but Martha moved first. She stood slowly, one hand on the table, the other closing around the back of the chair. Her voice was not loud, yet it carried in the old kitchen with more force than Caleb's shouting. "Do not speak about Ranger that way." Caleb stared at her. Martha's eyes stayed on him. "That dog bled on my floor and still tried to guard a man who could not lift his head. That dog remembered kindness longer than some people remember blood." Caleb's face reddened. "This is exactly what I mean. You are attaching emotion to what?" Martha asked. "My house? My life? The people I choose to trust?" He looked toward Elias. "Do not stand in my kitchen and call my memory irrational, because it does not serve you." For a moment, Caleb had no answer. That was the first crack. Elias did not fill the silence. He let Martha keep it. Caleb recovered by turning to anger. "You think this man came back out of devotion? He disappeared for 12 years. "Yes," Martha said. The single word was clean. It neither defended Elias nor condemned him. "Elias felt it pass through him," Martha continued. "But he came back. You were already here, Caleb. You knew where the road was." That was the second crack. Caleb grabbed the papers and stepped closer to the table. Sign the clarification tonight. Then we can discuss whatever sentimental performance you want tomorrow. Elias moved. Caleb stopped. Back up, Elias said. His voice was low enough that even the stove seemed to quiet around it. Caleb looked at him with open dislike now. Or what? Or you'll continue this conversation outside with the sheriff? The sheriff is not here. He's on his way. Caleb's jaw worked once. He reached past Elias toward Martha. Not to strike her, but to push the papers in front of her. His sleeve knocked the cracked wooden photo box. The box slipped from the table and hit the floor. The lid burst open. Photographs slid across the old boards. Martha made a sound Elias had not heard from her before, small and wounded, as if Caleb had dropped a living thing. Ranger stepped forward and growled. This time Caleb flinched, then hated himself for it. Get that damn dog away from me. No, Martha said. Caleb turned on her. You are letting a dying dog and a stranger ruin what little security you have left. Martha bent slowly to pick up the photographs. But Elias was already kneeling. He gathered them carefully, turning each one face up. Samuel Bell appeared again and again, younger beside a truck, older by the cabin, serious in uniform, awkward at what looked like a church picnic. Then one photograph made Elias stop. It showed two men in winter military gear. Samuel Bell stood on the left, lean and unsmiling. One gloved hand gripping the shoulder of another man, whose jacket was torn at the sleeve. The second man had light hair, pale eyes, and the same narrow mouth Caleb wore when he was trying not to show fear. Martha saw the picture in Elias's hand. Her face changed. Ray, she said. Caleb looked down. For the first time that night, his anger did not know where to go. Elias turned the photograph over. On the back, in faded ink, someone had written, Samuel pulled Ray out of the storm. A life should never be forgotten. The words sat in Elias's palm like something heavier than paper. Martha lowered herself back into the chair. Your father was 28 when Samuel carried him out. Caleb's voice came rough. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this, Martha said. No, Caleb snapped. It has nothing to do with property law, nothing to do with your safety, nothing to do with the fact that this cabin is falling apart. Samuel came home, coughing blood after that rescue, Martha said. He never said he regretted it. Caleb looked away. Martha's voice did not rise. It did not need to. You used to come here as a boy. You ate biscuits at that counter. Your father sat in that chair and cried the first Christmas after Samuel died because he said there was no reason he should be alive. And Samuel gone. I told him living was reason enough. The room held still. Even Caleb seemed trapped by the image of his father as a grieving man instead of a name in an old story. Then he hardened again. That was years ago. Yes, Martha said. And yet, here we are, still finding out what people remember. Headlights swept across the window again. Sheriff Tom Harlan's SUV pulled in behind Caleb's truck. Another set of lights followed, a dark sedan struggling up the hill, tires crunching through snow. Elias looked out and saw Nora's pickup behind them as well. Tom entered first, hat in hand but face set. Caleb, step away from the table. Caleb snatched up the papers. This is harassment. Grace Whitcomb came in behind Tom with a leather satchel and snow on the shoulders of her navy coat. She was smaller than her voice had suggested, but not softer. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, was pinned back. Her eyes went directly to the documents in Caleb's hand. I'm Grace Whitcomb, she said, counsel assisting Mrs. Bell pending review. I did not consent to you representing her, Caleb said. Grace looked at Martha. Mrs. Bell? Martha lifted her chin. I consent. Grace turned back. There we are. Caleb's mouth tightened. Grace held out her hand. The statement you attempted to obtain tonight. It is an attempted written declaration from the protected property owner, during an active temporary order. Hand it over or explain to Sheriff Harlan why you came here after service. Caleb did neither. Tom stepped closer. Caleb. That one word carried enough warning. Caleb threw the papers onto the table. Grace read the first page quickly. Her expression did not change, but Elias saw her silver pen appear in her hand. She underlined one sentence, then another. This says Mrs. Bell was pressured by Mr. Mercer to reject your care plan, Grace said. She was. Martha looked at him. If you wanted to care for me, Caleb, why did you never ask whether I had enough firewood? The question was quiet. It did not accuse with legal language. It did not mention fraud, power of attorney, property value, or survey access. That made it worse. Caleb opened his mouth. Nothing came. Martha continued. Soft, you knew the winters. You knew the stove smoked when the wind turned east. You knew I was here. For a second, Caleb's face showed the boy who had once stood in this kitchen, asking for biscuits. Then the man he had become buried him. I did what I could, Caleb said. Nora, standing near the door with her arms crossed, gave a bitter little laugh. You could find a notary at night, but not a snow shovel in January? Tom shot her a look, but not a strong one. Grace placed Caleb's statement into her folder. This will be submitted as further evidence of improper pressure. I also have confirmation from Dr. Albright's office. He did not examine Mrs. Bell in person. His assessment was based on information provided by you. Caleb went pale beneath the anger. Grace continued. The recorder's office confirms notice of survey access was redirected to your mailing address. Sheriff Harlan has documented last night's attempted relocation. We have the withheld correspondence from Mr. Mercer's unit. We have the repair assistance notice that never reached Mrs. Bell. Caleb looked toward the door. Tom moved slightly, not blocking him with drama, simply becoming a fact in the way. Am I under arrest? Caleb demanded. Not tonight, Tom said. Tonight you're coming down to give a formal statement, and you're going to stay away from this house while the court reviews the matter. This is not over. No, Grace said, but it has changed. Caleb looked at Martha one last time. There should have been remorse there. Maybe part of Martha still wanted it. Old love often waits foolishly for small miracles from people who have spent years proving they do not intend to offer them. But Caleb gave her only anger. Then Tom escorted him outside. Through the window, Elias watched Caleb step into the snow without the black folder in his hand. It remained on the kitchen table, beside Samuel's photograph and the statement he had tried to force into Martha's life. Nora let out the breath she had been holding. Grace turned to Martha. Are you hurt? Martha shook her head. Ranger, who had stayed standing far longer than his body wanted, finally lowered himself beside her chair. His breathing was heavy. Elias crouched at once, checking him. Easy, he whispered. Ranger's eyes stayed on Martha. I'm all right, Martha told him. Only then did the old dog close his eyes. No one cheered. No one declared it finished. The stove clicked. Snow tapped the windows. Martha sat with Samuel's photograph in her lap and the faded wool strip near her hand. Grace spoke quietly with Tom outside. Nora began making tea because Nora seemed to believe boiling water was the first step in repairing civilization. Elias remained on the floor beside Ranger, one hand resting on the dog's ribs, feeling each tired breath. Martha looked down at him. He came back, she said. Elias thought she meant Caleb at first. Then he realized she meant Ranger. Yes, he said. And so did you. He did not know how to answer. The next morning, the official word came through. The property was temporarily protected. Caleb's authority was under formal review, and North Star Ridge Holdings had suspended all action pending investigation. Not victory, not yet, but enough that Martha could remain in her house while the truth was examined. Elias packed his tools near the back door after breakfast. He had not decided to leave forever, only to go down the hill, make calls, arrange supplies, keep moving the way he always did when emotion became too crowded. Martha stopped him before he reached the porch. She placed the old strip of wool on the kitchen table. "Before you go," she said, "we should talk about what you think you still owe me." Elias stood with his hand on the doorframe. Outside, Ranger lay on the porch in the thin morning light, watching the road. And for the first time in 12 years, Elias understood that the hardest part of repayment might not be returning. It might be learning when the debt had changed its name. By morning, the snow had stopped. It did not feel like victory. Victory, Elias had learned, was usually louder in stories than in real life. In real life, after the danger stepped back, people still had to sweep broken glass, find missing medicine bottles, make coffee with hands that would not quite stop trembling, and decide what to do with the rest of the day. Martha Bell's cabin stood under a pale winter sun, old and wounded but still standing. Smoke lifted from the chimney in a thin gray ribbon. The porch rail Elias had braced the day before held firm under a crust of snow. The front steps had been salted. Ranger lay across the threshold with his silver muzzle on his paws, watching the road as if Caleb might return simply because evil disliked being inconvenienced. Grace Whitcomb called at 8:30. Martha insisted on answering the phone herself. Grace told her the property remained protected under the temporary order. Caleb's authority was under formal review. North Star Ridge Holdings had suspended all action involving the Bell Ridge parcel until the questions around representation and capacity were resolved. Dr. Albright's office had already begun trying to explain itself, which Grace said was usually what people did when they realized the floor beneath them had become thinner. Martha listened without smiling. "So I can stay in my house?" she asked. "For now, yes," Grace said. "And if the documents continue looking the way they look, for much longer than now." Martha closed her eyes. She did not cry. Elias had begun to understand that Martha's tears were like her best blankets, kept folded, used only when absolutely necessary. When the call ended, she placed the phone on the table and looked around the kitchen. The room was small, the stove was old, the floorboards creaked near the sink. The window above the counter had a draft Elias could feel from 6 feet away. Nothing about the place would have impressed a developer, a buyer, or a person who measured worth by square footage. But Martha touched the edge of the table as if greeting someone. "Still here," she said. Elias did not know if she meant the house or herself. Maybe both. Sheriff Tom Harlan came by before noon. He did not bring speeches. He brought a copied report, an extra flashlight, and a promise to drive past the property twice a day until the court review was complete. He stood in the doorway with his hat in both hands, looking less like a sheriff than a man trying to step carefully around his own regret. "Tom," Martha said, "if you keep holding that hat like a funeral program, I'll start charging you rent for the guilt." Nora Vale, who had arrived with a covered pot of soup and 3 folded blankets, laughed so hard she nearly dropped the basket. Tom's ears reddened. "Yes, ma'am." That was how the house began to heal. Not with a trumpet, not with a judge's final stamp, but with small embarrassments, hot soup, and a sheriff learning to accept being scolded by a woman he should have protected sooner. Nora set the pot on the stove and announced she had cooked too much. "No one cooks that much by accident," Martha said. "I'm terrible at math," Nora replied. "You run 6 rental cabins. Cabins don't complain about arithmetic." Martha gave her a look, but there was warmth under it. Elias stood by the back door, watching them. For 12 years he had carried Martha as a memory made of firelight and snow. Now she was more than memory. She was sharp-tongued, stubborn, exhausted, proud, and still perfectly capable of making other people feel foolish when they fussed over her too much. That mattered. Pity would have made her smaller. Gratitude, if done badly, could do the same thing. Elias understood that now he had not returned to become the master of her rescue. He had returned to make sure she remained the owner of her own life. So when he began repairs, he asked first. The roof needed work. The porch needed more than a temporary brace. The chimney pipe had rust around the collar. The back step tilted dangerously toward the shed. The outdoor light had died long ago, leaving the yard black after sunset. Elias could have fixed half of it without asking. The way military men often fixed problems, quickly, efficiently, and with the assumption that usefulness excused control. Instead, he stood beside Martha with a notebook. "What do you want kept exactly as it is?" he asked. Martha looked suspicious. "That sounds like a trick question." "It isn't. Men with notebooks always think it isn't." He waited. She pointed with her cane toward the back window. "Samuel put that shelf up crooked in 1979. Leave it crooked. All right. The blue bowl on the mantel stays there. All right. And don't replace the kitchen table. I know it wobbles. I have wobbled beside it for years. We understand each other." Elias wrote that down. Nora leaned against the doorframe and whispered, "You are taking orders from the right commander now." Elias glanced at her. "I noticed." The next days settled into work. Not dramatic work. Honest work. Elias replaced the worst roof boards only after Grace confirmed there was no issue with emergency weather protection and documented repairs. He took photos before and after he saved receipts. He wrote, "Safety stabilization," on the top of each page because Grace had told him, "If you are going to be noble, at least be organized." He repaired the porch rail with new lumber, but kept the old hand-carved post Samuel had shaped years before. He fixed the chimney collar so smoke stopped leaking back into the kitchen when the wind turned east. He installed a motion light above the porch, not bright enough to ruin the dark, only enough that Martha could see the steps. He stacked firewood beneath the overhang, 3 rows deep, bark side up the way, Martha insisted. "Not like that," she called from the doorway on the second afternoon. "Renoon." Elias paused with an armload of split wood. Martha pointed with her cane. "Bark up. Rain runs off better. It's under cover. Rain is rude. It finds a way." He turned the pieces over behind him. Ranger lay on an old rug Nora had dragged onto the porch. The German shepherd watched the woodpile with solemn interest, as if judging whether Elias had finally become trainable. "You too," Elias said. Ranger blinked. The old dog's good days and bad days began to show themselves more clearly. Some mornings he rose easily, walked to the porch, and lay in the thin winter sun as if age were only an opinion. Other mornings his hind legs trembled before he could stand. Elias learned to wait instead of rushing to lift him. Martha had been right. Ranger deserved the dignity of deciding what he could do. When Ranger needed help, Elias gave it. When Ranger did not, Elias kept his hands to himself. That, too, was a kind of love. One evening, after the roof stopped leaking and the firewood stood properly stacked, Martha called Elias inside. The kitchen smelled of Nora's soup and fresh coffee. A small sewing basket sat on the table. Beside it lay the faded strip of wool Martha had used on Ranger's wound 12 years ago. Elias stopped in the doorway. "I thought you wanted me to keep it," he said. "I do," Martha replied. "Sit down." He sat. Ranger, sensing the seriousness of human rituals involving tables, came in slowly and lowered himself beside Martha's chair. Martha lifted the wool strip. It looked fragile in her hands, but not useless. Frayed, stained, faded, yet still present. From her own pale green scarf, she had cut a narrow piece of fabric. Newer, softer, still carrying the faint smell of cedar and smoke. "I was angry when you kept this," she said. Elias looked up. "Why?" "Because I thought you had turned a hard night into a relic. People do that. They make a shrine out of something painful so they don't have to live past it." Elias had no defense. Martha threaded a needle. "Then I realized I was angry because I had done the same thing with this house." The fire clicked in the stove. She began sewing the new green strip along the old wool, stitch by careful stitch. Her fingers were bent with age, but they remembered work. Elias watched the needle pass through fabric. It looked like a wound being closed without pretending the skin had never been cut. "I kept this place exactly as Samuel left too much of it," she said. "Some of that was love. Some of it was fear. Hard to tell the difference after a while. You don't have to change anything you don't want to. I know." She pulled the thread through. "That is why I might." Elias looked at her then. Martha did not look like a woman being saved. She looked like a woman deciding what survival would mean, now that the immediate danger had passed. She finished the seam and tied the thread. The old wool and the new green cloth lay together in her palm, mismatched but stronger than either piece alone. She handed it to Elias. "The old piece was for the night Ranger almost died," she said. "The new piece is so you stop carrying it like a sentence." Elias closed his hand around it. For a long moment he could not speak. "I should have come back sooner," he said at last. "Yes," Martha said. The honesty landed harder than comfort would have. Then she added, "But guilt is a poor kind of loyalty. It eats all the food and does none of the chores." Elias let out a breath that was almost a laugh and almost not. "I don't know how to put it down. No one puts a thing like that down all at once." Martha glanced toward Ranger. "You carry it differently, that is all." Elias looked at the old dog beside her chair. Ranger's eyes were half closed. His breathing was slow and deep. For once, he was not watching the door. Martha leaned back. "I did not pull you off that road so you could spend the rest of your life owing me. You saved my life. I opened a door. I made soup," I complained. "Do not make me grander than I am. You split your last bread 3 ways. Yes, and I regretted it by morning because I was hungry." Her mouth twitched. "Goodness is not always graceful, Elias. Sometimes it is cranky and underfed." That was so Martha that he smiled before he could stop himself. She softened. Then, "I saved you because there was a man and a dog outside in the cold. That is all." "No," Elias said quietly. "It isn't." She waited. "You reminded me there was still something worth coming back to. I didn't know it then. Maybe I didn't know it for years." His hand tightened around the sewn wool. "You saved me so I would remember I was still human." Martha looked away toward the window. Outside, late light lay on the snow. The road down to Nora's cabin curved through the pines. Newly familiar. The mountain that had once buried Elias's name now seemed to hold 3 lives in a rough, imperfect shelter. The legal process took weeks, then months. It did not wrap itself neatly because real wrongs seldom do. Caleb was investigated for improper pressure, document manipulation, and interference with Martha's mail. The power of attorney was suspended, then invalidated. Dr. Albright's assessment was discredited. North Star Ridge Holdings withdrew from the Bell property, unwilling to stand in the mud Caleb had made. Grace rebuilt Martha's paperwork with the patience of a woman who trusted signatures only after they had earned it. Tom Harlan kept driving past, sometimes with official purpose, sometimes with a bag of groceries he claimed had been left over at the station. Nora organized neighbors to help with firewood and plowing. Though she insisted it was not charity, merely community maintenance with better soup. Martha accepted help unevenly, which was to say honestly. Some days she was grateful, some days she snapped. Some days she sent Elias away for hovering. "You are not a porch post," she told him once. "Stop standing there." He learned, that winter. Elias kept renting Nora's cabin below the hill. At first it was practical, then it became habit. By spring, when Nora said she had been thinking of selling that little cabin anyway, Elias bought it. Not to guard Martha like a mission. To have a place where returning did not require an emergency. The first morning after he took ownership, he stood outside the small cabin under the hill and looked up toward Martha's home. Smoke rose from her chimney. Ranger stood beside him for a moment, leaning lightly against his leg. Then the old dog began walking, slowly toward the open patch between the 2 cabins. Halfway there, Ranger lay down. Elias started toward him. Martha called from her porch. "Leave him. He has chosen his office." Ranger placed his silver muzzle on his paws. From that spot, he could see Martha's porch, Elias's truck, and the road between the pines. His hearing was not what it had been. He could not run like the dog who had once pulled Elias from a ravine, but he had chosen the position of a guardian, so they let him keep it. The final snow of the season melted slowly. Water ran from the eaves in bright drops. The porch light Elias had installed clicked off at dawn, inside Martha's kitchen. 3 bowls sat on the table: oatmeal for Martha, eggs for Elias, and a carefully cooled bowl for Ranger, because Martha said old soldiers should not burn their tongues, regardless of species. Elias came up from the lower cabin, carrying firewood he had stacked correctly, without being told. Martha saw it through the window and opened the door. "Well," she called, "look at that. He can learn." Elias looked down at Ranger. "She means you." Martha laughed then. Not loudly. Not like a woman suddenly made young, but like someone who had found a small piece of mourning worth keeping. Elias stepped onto the porch. The sewn wool rested in his jacket pocket, no longer a weight. Not exactly a wound either. More like a map. Old cloth joined to new. A record of a storm, a debt, and the long road away from owing toward belonging. No one mentioned repayment over breakfast. There was no need. Some debts, when answered with love and presence, do not disappear. They become a table with room for one more bowl. They become a porch light left on. They become an old dog sleeping between 2 homes, still guarding the people who had once guarded him. And on that cold, sunlit morning, with smoke rising from Martha Bell's chimney and Elias's cabin glowing below the hill, the mountain finally seemed less like the place that had almost taken them. It had become the place where they had learned to stay. Sometimes the kindness that saves us does not arrive loudly. It may come as a warm bowl of soup, a torn piece of wool, an open door in a storm, or one person choosing not to look away. Elias spent years believing gratitude was a debt he had failed to pay, but Martha showed him something deeper. True kindness is not meant to chain us to guilt. It is meant to teach us how to become shelter for someone else. Maybe there is someone in your own life who once opened a door when you were cold, tired, or afraid. If this story reminded you of that person, share their memory in the comments. And if stories of loyalty, grace, and second chances speak to your heart, please subscribe and stay with us for the next journey. May your home be warm, your heart be steady, and may God place the right people on your road when the storm feels too heavy to walk through alone.